Api, indeed. Siddhanam, of those who have achieved perfection. Kaschit, someone. Mam, me. Veti, does know. Tatvataha, in fact. Okay, I'll read the translation. Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection. And of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. So you can repeat after me. Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection. And of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. Okay, the purport. There are various grades of men, and out of many thousands, one may be sufficiently interested in transcendental realization to try to know what is the self, what is the body, and what is the absolute truth. Generally, mankind is simply engaged in the animal propensities, namely eating, sleeping, defending, and mating, and hardly anyone is interested in transcendental knowledge. The first 6 chapters of the Gita are meant for those who are interested in transcendental knowledge, in understanding the self, the super self, in the process of realization by jnana yoga, and discrimination of the self from matter. However, Krishna can be known only by persons who are in Krishna consciousness. Other transcendentalists may achieve impersonal Brahman realization, for this is easier than understanding Krishna. Krishna is the Supreme Person, but at the same time, he is beyond the knowledge of Brahman and Paramatma. The yogis and jnanis are confused in their attempts to understand Krishna. Although the greatest of the impersonalists, Sripad Shankacharya, has admitted in his Gita commentary that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. His followers do not accept Krishna as such, for it is very difficult to know Krishna, even though one has transcendental realization of impersonal Brahman. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the cause of all causes, the primeval Lord Govinda, Ishvara Parama Krishna, Satchit Ananda Vigraha, Anadir Adir Govinda, Sarva Karana Karnam. It is very difficult for the non-devotees to know him. Although non-devotees declare that the path of bhakti, or devotional service, is very easy, they cannot practice it. If the path of bhakti is so easy, as the non-devotee class of men proclaim, then why do they take up the difficult path? Actually, the path of bhakti is not easy. The so-called path of bhakti, practiced by unauthorized persons, without knowledge of bhakti, may be easy, but when it is practiced factually, according to the rules and regulations, the speculative scholars and philosophers fall away from the path. Sri Rupa Goswami writes in his Bhakti Rasrita Sindhu 1.2.101, Shruti Shpriti Puranandi Pancharatra Vidhim Vind Aik Antik Harar Bhaktir Pataiva Kalpate. Devotional service of the Lord that ignores the authorized Vedic literatures like the Upanishads, Puranas, and Narada Pancharatra is simply an unnecessary disturbance in society. It is not possible for the Brahmin realized impersonalist or the Paramatma realized yogi to understand Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as the son of Mother Yashoda or the charioteer of Arjuna. Even the great demigods are sometimes confused about Krishna. Uyanti yat surya mam tu veda na kaschana. No one knows me as I am, the Lord says, and if one does know him, then sa mahatma sudurlabhaha. Such a great soul is very rare. Therefore, unless one practices devotional service to the Lord, one cannot know Krishna as he is, tattvataha, even though one is a great scholar or philosopher. Only the pure devotees can know something of the inconceivable, transcendental qualities in Krishna. In the cause of all causes, in his omnipotence and opulence, and in his wealth, fame, strength, beauty, knowledge, and renunciation, because Krishna is benevolently inclined to his devotees. He is the last word in Raman realization, and the devotees alone can realize him as he is. Therefore, it is said, Attaha Sri Krishna Namadi, Na Bhaved Grahayam Indriyaya. Sevan Mukhi Mukhe Hi Jivadao. Svayam Eva Sfurti Adaha. No one can understand Krishna as he is by the blunt material senses, but he reveals himself to the devotees, being pleased with them for their transcendental loving service unto him. Bhakti Rasbrita Sindhu 1-2-234. I'll read the translation again, the verse. Out of many thousands among men, one may endeavor for perfection, and of those who have achieved perfection, hardly one knows me in truth. So I do want to go through the purport and make some comments and have some discussion, but before I do that, this verse, the purport of the verse is basically that it's rare to be able to know Krishna. And so I thought, well, to know, what does that mean? And realize there's different meanings, different levels of knowing, different, alternative definitions to know. For example, well, Prabhupada has said that we should preach according to time, place, and circumstance, right? And according to our own realizations. I mean, that's all we can do. I can't pretend I have other experiences than what I really do, or other intellectual qualities. So in keeping with that, I'm going to talk about the different ways of knowing, not using Sanskrit, because I'm not an expert at Sanskrit, but using Italian. So I hope you bear with me, just to give you an example. So in Italian, one meaning when they say I know is they use the word conoscere. And from that we get the word recognize or cognizant. And that simply means, you recognize somebody, you're aware of them, you know them in that way. Like if somebody said, do you know who the President of the United States is? Yeah, it's Obama. I know Obama. I mean, that's just one that's very superficial, that I know Obama. I really don't know him personally. I don't have a personal knowledge of him or know that much about him, but I'm aware of him. In, I think it was 1979, one of the devotees from India met the Pope, who was Pope John Paul II, the Polish Pope, the one that reigned for a long time. And he presented him the Pope of the Bhagavad Gita, as it is. And there was a photo taken, and it was published in Back to Godhead magazine. I think it was November 1979. Has anybody seen that? You're too young for that. But I mean, it's still out there. You can look at it on the internet, or maybe even get it in print. So they put it in Back to Godhead with a little description, and apparently they didn't quote the Pope in the magazine, but devotees have said that what he said was, "Oh, Krishna, I've heard of him. He's great, and I've heard of his philosophical concepts, and they're very interesting," or whatever. Now, obviously, so the Pope knows Krishna, or that Pope knew Krishna, but he didn't really know the way we do, intimate details, knowledge about him. But he did recognize it, and that's obviously part of our mission, and Prabhupada's mission, is to get people in all countries, especially here, because we're in the West, to recognize Krishna, to know who Krishna is, at least by name and somewhat by reputation. And so with the Hare Krishna movement, the name Krishna has become kind of a household name. It wasn't so 50, 100 years ago, at least in America, that people really knew anything. Now, at least people are recognizing it's not a complete mystery to them. They've heard something about Krishna. But that's an introductory level, just that kind of knowing, just recognizing. Of course, as devotees, that's step one for us. We recognize Krishna. I mean, we see the deities on the altar when the curtains will open. After a while, we can begin to recognize in paintings of Krishna that maybe he's blackish in color. Sometimes they say the color of a new forming cloud, bluish. If you see a deity that looks like he might be from India and he has a flute, chances are that's Krishna. So we begin to recognize Krishna by appearance, by his name, by his reputation, by his associates, by his form, and so forth. I mean, so that is part of it. That's important, but that's just rudimentary. It's kind of introductory to just be able to recognize somebody, recognize the name. Or, oh yeah. For example, with your parents, you wouldn't say your mother or father. You wouldn't say, "I know of my mother." Oh yes, I know of my father. Like you would say of a stranger or say a famous person, a movie star or something. When you say you know them, you just mean you know of them. So that's one level. So another level meaning for when we say I know is when I know about someone or I know about something. I know some facts. I know some details. And in Italian, they use the word sapere, S-A-P-E-R-E, sapere. That's that kind of knowing when you know facts about someone. You have knowledge. The word sapient comes from that word in like Homo sapiens. That word sapiens comes from sapere. It means wise man, Homo sapiens, or thinking man or knowing man or something. So that's a step up. When we start with Krishna, we start to understand, or we start to know about Krishna, about his qualities, about his form, about his pastimes. I know that Krishna's form is Satchidananda. It says so in this verse, but I know that his form is Satchidananda. I know Sat is eternal, Chit is knowledge, and Ananda is bliss. So I know he's eternal, and he's full of knowledge, and he's full of bliss. And I know those are substances. It's kind of difficult to understand in the beginning that those are knowledge is a substance. Eternity is actually a substance. Like Krishna has a form, so there's substance to his form. But his form is knowledge, bliss, and eternity. And so my knowing might kind of stop there. I mean, I know that, but I don't have a deep understanding of what I just said about Krishna's form. It's still a bit of a mystery to me. I start thinking about, wow, knowledge is a substance. I think of things more concrete when I think of a substance, but how is a knowledge a substance? Wow. If that's Krishna's form, knowledge, is he like a walking encyclopedia? Is that what that means? Well, we can, have philosophical speculation on that, but we have limited intellectual capabilities, of course. But it's good to know that's stronger than just recognizing a name or a person. To know about them is, it's a more powerful kind of knowing. And then the third and final way, the Italians say capire, C-A-P-I-R-E, to know, capire. And that means really to understand. That's the next level up, that kind of knowing, to really understand. That's where from capire comes capiche. You might have heard that. Hey, capisce paisan, do you understand? So we want to understand Krishna, that kind of knowing. That's real powerful. To understand, to have deep and profound knowing. We want to know him. We want to know him personally. Okay, so that's really, now, that's the goal. And of course, it's difficult, and it says so in the purport, it's difficult to understand Krishna. I mean, there's a world of difference between us and Krishna, right? We have limited everything, limited capabilities to understand, limited intellectual qualities, and Krishna is universal and he's infinite, and so forth. So we try to understand what we can about Krishna. We try to know him in that way of, as much as we can, to understand, go deeper into our knowledge of Krishna. And of course, to help us along the way, we have association, right, with other devotees who maybe are more advanced and like spiritual masters and so forth, to help guide us in the understanding. But we can't get too caught up. We can't expect that we're going to fully understand Krishna. It's just not possible because we are, so lesser, so inferior to Krishna. But it doesn't mean we don't desire to more fully understand Krishna than we can. And if you think about your own spiritual path, your own life, I'm sure you know a lot more now than you did when you began this journey, and you understand a lot more now, right, about Krishna, about the philosophy. Whether you've been at it for a couple of months or for several years, I would think you're making progress that way, so you understand more. I would think each and every time you read Bhagavad Gita and go through a verse or something, you get more and more insight or realization about it. I mean, that's the whole point. So it's a process of getting to know Krishna. So that's the thing we really want to know him. We want to know of him, we want to know about him, but we really want to know him. So let's look at the purport and make sure we understand the points that Prabhupada's making here. So, and that's it for Italian for tonight. We'll leave Italian behind. There are various grades of men, and out of many thousands, one may be sufficiently interested in transcendental realization to try to know what is the self, what is the body, and what is the absolute truth. So it's rare that someone comes to Krishna consciousness. Now, in the Vedas, it states on how many forms of life there are, or how many species. Who knows how many species the Vedas?
8,400,000.
Right, 8.4 million, 8,400,000 forms of life or species. So that would be everything from amoebas and plankton and spiders and worms, all the birds and fishes and mammals and so on and so forth. So, and that's just species, that's not the number of souls. Obviously there's hundreds, thousands, millions of souls in each class of that, past, present, and future. So there's a lot, and so each one of those species occupied by a soul, a jiva soul. So there are 8.4 million species that a jiva soul could occupy. And how many of those are human? More. 6,000, 100,000?
400,000.
400,000. Yeah, it's kind of easy to remember because it's 8,400,000 total, and the 400,000 is the human. You think of it that way. And so that's what, like 5%? I worked it out one time, 4 or 5%.
There's trouble to the rest of the 8 million.
Yeah, right. And of course, there's a lot of variety among those 4 million, and some of those human species may be not manifest right now, or at least that we could see. But if you think past, present, future, not just this country or this planet, the whole universe, and not just this universe, forever, infinitely, there's that many varieties. So it's rare just to be in a human form from that perspective, right? You've got only 4 or 5% of the species are actually human. So that's what this verse, the universe that this verse is talking about, or the total, since it says Manu Shanam, it's Manu refers to men or humans. So even of the humans, it's rare. So we're rare among species, and to be interested in transcendental life and Krishna is rare, very rare among humans. Of course, that's one thing that distinguishes the humans from the animals, other than giving them problems. We have the intellectual capacity, right, to inquire about Krishna, to have some understanding. And so it says here, generally mankind is simply engaged in the animal propensities, namely eating, sleeping, defending, and mating, and hardly anyone is interested in transcendental knowledge. So we've talked about this many times in class before, that all animals, including us, as well as all other kinds of animals, can do these simple things, eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, all these things really having to do with the material life, for sense gratification and for survival. So that doesn't distinguish us that we can do those things too, because animals can do those things. So that's no great accomplishment or success to be able to eat, sleep, defend, or mate. But to go beyond that is what's human, to have inquiry into spiritual life, to understand that we're more than animals. So it says the first 6 chapters of the Gita are meant for those who are interested in transcendental knowledge and understanding the self, the super self, and the process of realization by jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, and discrimination of the self from matter. So what we've read so far, we find out that so some humans do become interested in spirituality and transcendental realization, and for those that we are, we have to be able to understand the difference between the self and the body, it says here, and the absolute truth. And we've had this discussion before too. So if we start with the absolute truth, that's the highest. That's why it's called absolute, why it's called truth. The absolute truth is Krishna, it is God. And there are different features or aspects which we'll go into in a minute about the absolute truth. It's not so simple, it can be a little bit more profound, more complex. But let's say that's God. Absolute truth is God, it's Krishna. And then we have the self, which is us, the jiva soul, and the body, which is what we're occupying, it's material, it's what we're occupying. So if we begin to understand, okay, so there's a difference. There's God, who's absolute, primeval, cause of all causes, the original person, the superior person, and then there's us. Each of us is a self, is a soul. And that's interesting. So we have these two entities, so it begs the question, it makes you want to ask, what's our relationship? What's the connection between the two? And that's really where we start using our intelligence and start exploring spirituality, is when we start thinking about what is the relationship between the self and God, between us and God, the individual soul and God. And as Prabhupada says in his purports on Bhagavad Gita, quoting Krishna, that the self is part and parcel of God. So we are part and parcel of the absolute truth. But on the same hand, we're different. So all the jiva souls are part of the absolute truth, but that isn't all that the absolute truth is. It isn't just the sum of the individual jiva souls, okay? They say the sum is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So there is something external to us in the aspect of the absolute truth. So we are kin, we're related to Krishna, we are kinship of Krishna, in that sense of being part and parcel. And we belong, so in that sense we belong to Krishna. So it's only natural that we have to want to explore or investigate and get to know Krishna, because we're kinship with him and we are belonging to him. And our relationship, as it says in Bhagavad Gita, is one of eternal service, is servant and master. Krishna, absolute truth, is master, we are servant of that. And it's not a forced kind of slavery. You know, especially in the West, we have this horrible experience of slavery here, but slavery's been in almost all cultures, I think, certainly in Greece and Rome. I would imagine in the East too, in Asia, slavery's been a way of life. So it's not that forced slavery when we talk about servitude or being a servant of Krishna. It's actually a relationship, and it's a loving relationship, and it's voluntary service. And it's our natural, what they call constitutional position. I mean, that's what we were made for. That's how we were made, as a counterpart of Krishna, as a servant of Krishna. And that's where we find our true identity and our true happiness, our true selves. I think in most of our lives, there's been times when we felt we had to compromise ourselves, either at home, on the job, at school, in the neighborhood, or whatever. We couldn't really be ourselves. We had to be what someone else wanted, in such a way that we had to compromise ourselves, our integrity a little bit. And it's really freeing and liberating when you can be yourself, and we can feel at home. And when you're with people where you can feel at home and be yourself, it's always a good feeling. It's one reason why we like each other, why we like certain people, is we feel comfortable with them. We can be ourselves. We have similar interests and so forth. So it all stands to reason that that it works that way. So why is it difficult? Why isn't it so easy then, if that's kind of the formula that's out there in the relationship that's been created by God? Why does it work smoothly? Why don't we just embrace that and all be transcendentalists? Well, obviously there are obstacles to us on that path. Number one, we're here, we desire to be here, so we're under some kind of material conditioning, under some kind of material constraints. We find ourselves in this situation, occupying a body on planet Earth. It means we must have some desires for material gratification that are taking precedence, priority over our spiritual life, that are interfering with it. So that's part of it is ourselves. We desire some material things, so that's driving a wedge into the spiritual relationship. Also along the way, we may want to develop the relationship, but we may have some philosophical doubts sometimes. It may be that we have a different upbringing. We may have a different background, a religious background or cultural background that's different. Those of us born in the West, born into Christianity or Judaism, or those are atheists in any country, or personalists or whatever, may have some philosophical hurdles. May have some doubts, philosophical, maybe because you've been raised differently or you found some different philosophies along the way. So you kind of have to reconcile them. So you might have to go through some process of philosophical speculation or philosophical inquiry, reading the scriptures and so forth, to get more comfortable and understand the philosophy, behind our spirituality. Prabhupada says, I think it's chapter 3, verse 3, in his purport, that for Krishna consciousness and for spirituality, we need both philosophy and religion. We need both together. We need philosophy. We need to have the knowledge, spiritual knowledge. We need to read the scriptures. We need to know why we're doing what we're doing. We need to understand that. But we're not just armchair philosophers. We're not just knowledge seekers. We have to put it into practice. And that's the religion side. We have to have spiritual practices, bhakti yoga and so forth. So we need both, together to do that. So we may have some obstacles in our path, not just philosophical. The mind, we've talked about the mind in earlier chapters, can be our best friend or our worst enemy. The mind is thinking, feeling, and willing, and it'll take you to sense gratification and to material issues if you don't, train the mind. We could have, we have regulative principles to help us, right, combat these obstacles. So what are the 4 main principles, regulative principles that we have here? No meat eating.
No gambling.
No gambling.
No intoxication.
No intoxication.
No illicit sex.
No illicit sex. So that tells us that things like illicit sex might be an obstacle in our devotional service, as well as the other ones, gambling, meat eating, and so forth. Even something like illness. Some people, when you have physical illness, they kind of, why me? How can there be a God if I'm sick like this, or my child is sick, or my child died? They have that kind of reaction, so it might be an impediment. On the other hand, it might be an impetus, it might be an incentive. Sometimes people get more spiritual when they get ill or they face adversity. That's a good thing. So some of these things, can go either way. So we have the regulative principles to help us on combating these obstacles on our journey, on our devotional path. And those were kind of stated, no meat eating, no intoxication, no illicit sex, no gambling. It's all no, negatives. Anything positive in regulating ourselves.
Chanting 16 rounds.
Chanting 16 rounds. So when we get initiated and we take our vows, for those 4 regulative principles, we always add that we'll chant 16 rounds a day with love, and at least 16 rounds a day of the Maha Mantra with love and devotion, very sincerely. And of course, there's many other things we do as well. And it's not just when we become initiated that we follow the regulative principles. The regulative principles are recommended, and I would say required of all of us. Even if you're not initiated yet, if you're on this spiritual path, you should be, as much as you can, observing those regulative principles. Not for a couple of reasons. One, you want to become qualified to become initiated. And I know at least in ISKCON there are requirements, like you have to have been chanting 16 rounds of the Maha Mantra a day for some period of time. I've lost track of if that's a year. I think it might vary by spiritual master, but it has to be like a year. Maybe somebody may want longer than that. And the same thing that you're following these regulative principles. No meat eating, no illicit sex, and so forth, for a period of time. To even qualify to be up for initiation, and then certainly to get initiated. So that's one, of course, reason we do it. But even if you're not right now on that path to be considered for initiation, or even that's necessarily in the near future for you, you still want to follow those regulative principles in and of themselves to regulate your spiritual life. Whether it's going to lead to initiation or not, it's the proper and right thing to do, and it will help you advance. So let me continue now. So it says, however, Krishna can be known only by persons who are in Krishna consciousness. Other transcendentalists may achieve impersonal Brahman realization, for this is easier than understanding Krishna. Krishna is the Supreme Person, but at the same time, he is beyond the knowledge of Brahman and Paramatma. So we said the Absolute Truth earlier, we said the Absolute Truth has these different features, so we can discuss them now. There's 3 aspects or features of the Absolute Truth, right? There's Brahman, which is the effulgence of Krishna, the Brahma Jyoti, sometimes we say. Then